All righty. So thank you everyone for joining our virtual event today to discuss how IT leaders can leverage an employee-centric culture to attract and retain top talent. We're joined here by a distinguished panel of talent acquisition and consulting experts from Korn Ferry's technology and digital practice. So I'm so excited to be here because this subject speaks to me. I asked to host this particular event today. I believe that it's the most important and most powerful thing that a technology leader can do to build a winning team. So let me start by introducing this winning team of experts. Justin Martinez joins us today. Justin leads the North American Technology Officers Practice at Korn Ferry's Professional Search Division. In this role, Justin is primarily focused on providing support and thought leadership to the teams executing technology engagements across all industry verticals. He has experience with digital transformation, cloud infrastructure, enterprise architecture, data analytics and data science, IoT and IIoT. I think I'm gonna have to ask Justin exactly what that means because I'm not familiar with IIoT, but product engineering and product management. We have Brian Reedy. Did I pronounce your name right, Brian? All right. Brian is a senior client partner and global account lead. He specializes in rewards and benefits, which is probably why we were talking about compensation just a few minutes ago, and is based in Seattle. Mr. Reedy has worked with clients ranging from global Fortune 10 to startup organizations in North America, Europe, Asia, South America, and Australia. Designing integrated reward systems that improve business outcomes. He brings over 30 years of experience in human capital, financial and operational consulting. And I'm guessing, Brian, you did put in a lot of miles of flying before the pandemic. So Lisa Berger, did I pronounce your last name right, Lisa?
Yes, you did, thank you.
All right, thank you. So for me, Lisa is one of those few people that you can meet and just, that just exudes brilliance when you meet her. As a trusted consultant and advisor in the Digital Center of Excellence at Korn Ferry, Lisa supports digital transformation initiatives for her clients from digital experiences, services, content, marketplaces, service platforms, transactional commerce, omni-channel retail, and digital analytics. She has pioneered the digital search space going back to 2005. She brings a deep understanding of digital industries, strategies, tactics, platforms, and top digital talent in the marketplace, specifically creative UX, product management, digital analytics, digital marketing, and content. So you can see what I mean when I say brilliance. And finally, my friend, Sean Swerdlow. I think I got that right, Sean? I've been saying it for a long time. I hope I haven't been butchering it for years, or for months at least. Sean is a senior client partner at Korn Ferry Consulting and is based in Los Angeles. He is part of the technology industry practice with a focus on the intersection of technology, communications, media, and entertainment. A collaborative consultant, builder, and problem solver. Sean's 20+ years of experience span a range of industries and critical business and technology priorities. He brings a track record of helping leading organizations address their highest priority growth opportunities and execution-focused challenges. So voila, it's our panel for today. So everybody, please give a virtual hand to our distinguished panel today, and let's get this cracking. I'm going to pass it over to Sean.
Great, thank you so much, Kevin, for the kind words and the introduction. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. It was about a year ago that we had presented on some topics in this general kind of sphere, but really excited to be back. So thank you for inviting Korn Ferry, and we're excited for an interactive discussion. We would love questions to come in as we go through. We would like to avoid having this be a lengthy presentation and waiting till the end. So as we're going through, Kevin, I know you're gonna jump in as you have questions, and we encourage others to do the same. So on that note, I'm going to share my screen. And in terms of our agenda, so we are going to start with some perspective on some of the current talent trends, the technology market. This whole topic of the retention challenge is huge right now for everybody. So we'll be spending some time on that. And then how to address these challenges. What are companies doing as it comes to talent acquisition, having the right employee value proposition, and then retaining and developing talent and having a great employee experience. And then we'll look forward to the Q&A as well. And as Kevin mentioned, we're bringing perspectives today from both our talent side of the business, Justin and Lisa, and then from the consulting side of the business, Brian, myself, where we do compensation work, leadership development work, assessment work, which all kind of ties into these topics at hand. On that note, I'm going to hand it over to Justin.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. So this is it's a pretty interesting slide that looks very busy, but at the end of the day, I think it's giving quite a bit of information that you all are already very familiar with, and not to make assumptions, but maybe having some challenges with right now. Right now, if you want to call it the war for tech talent, but what we're seeing in the market, despite some of the changes, even over the last week or two, specific to tech companies and some of the announcements, there's a pretty significant focus on very specific technical backgrounds and skill sets. The bottom left graph is one of the most telling, right? Software engineering, machine learning, data science, DevOps. We're seeing quite a bit occur in the digital space as well, which is a great area that combines a bunch of different skill sets. But when it comes to what we're seeing in the market, this slide is a great illustration of there's just a lot going on, and it's a very busy, tough market. Regardless of industry, tech talent it's in high demand. And I can see Sean's cursor right there, and he's pointing out to a very specific aspect, and that is even for traditional non-tech organizations, tech talent is becoming an absolute necessity for their growth and survival. So we're seeing it in financial services, healthcare, brick and mortar retail, especially with manufacturing as well. And Kevin, that's where the double IoT comes from, the Internet of Things and then the industrial Internet of Things. But some manufacturers care about it being the double IoT in comparison to IoT. But Sean, if you want to hit the next slide, some of the things that Korn Ferry has specifically called out, and we don't have to walk through all 10 of these. There are a couple of specific ones that I think are most prevalent, but these are the top 10 talent trends that Korn Ferry has outlined for 2022. The few that I think are really important to chat about. Number 2, which is internal mobility. You went through the difficulty and the struggle of being able to attract and get these candidates on the team and onboarded, but then they're immediately asking, what additional aspects can I take on? What opportunity for growth is there? Sometimes they want to transition into a completely different function, completely different environment. And so having an environment that is conducive for internal mobility is going to help with retention. So that one is extremely important. Number 5, from an incentives perspective, incentives isn't always going to be synonymous with base and with a slight increase or with a one-time bonus. There are plenty of other incentives that current employees as well as future employees are going to be looking for. 6 and 7, sustainability, diversity, equity, inclusion. Those are front of house and very important for candidates. Having a clear understanding of where the organization stands, what the impact the organization is having. Candidate experience not necessarily always going to be the pace at which the interview process, but what's the turnaround on feedback? How timely are you? Is the ease of scheduling and ease of gathering availability? All of those things are going to be extremely important and really, dovetail into number 9, which is just the human touch. When candidates interview, it's a very vulnerable experience, and just knowing there's another human on the other side that understands that, recognizes, and respects that, it makes a very significant impact. So again, top 10 talent trends that we're seeing in 2022 as a firm, and that we're keeping an eye out on. John, you want to? Perfect. When it comes to the talent landscape for technology, again, despite what we're seeing in the news over the last couple of weeks, it's not going to slow down. And so we are anticipating, especially with the supply and demand, there are going to be some future headwinds, even more so than there are currently. And so ensuring that we're always honing in on what the candidate experience is. How are we presenting ourselves as an organization externally to potential candidates? What's the experience once a candidate applies? How do we move them through the process? That's just the first part of it. The second aspect of, okay, great, you got them through the door, you got them on the team. How do we keep them? Especially now that the competition is no longer what is local to your neighborhood, but globally. I mean, you're having to compete against some of the behemoths out there. So what sort of environment, what sort of opportunities do you need to provide? What sort of culture do you need to provide to ensure that you're retaining your top talent and allowing them to continue to grow and scale? So one of the other aspects, 5 of the roles that we see growing drastically are going to be specific to cloud, digital technology, agile, software engineering, data analytics, and information security. So those are the 5 areas that we've really invested in as a firm in terms of growing our recruiting presence, because that's where we see the most opportunity within the market. Sean, if you want to.
Justin,
Go ahead, Kevin.
Something stuck out to me in your first slide and in this slide right here. And that was, I think, in your very first slide, it was I saw a 669% increase in job postings for customer success and 173% increase in job postings for product management. That kind of speaks to me there also, because we take such a customer-centric approach, or for us, a citizen-centric approach to the technologies that we choose and how we go about deploying solutions for the city here. What's driving that?
Couple of different things. I do think the introduction of technology into multiple aspects, whether it's certain technology that you may have rolled out as an organization for the local community, right? With that technology, you're going to get a number of questions, and that's going to drive a pretty rapid demand for having customer success. My wife is an enterprise customer success employee over at LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And with that, you would think I would get some of my questions as well as some of my product wants. I'd get that escalated a little bit faster than others. Definitely not the case, for what it's worth. But with a lot of new technology in every industry, every vertical, the demand for folks that can be there to help support your customers and, again, provide that experience, it's going to be key. And with that, product management, I would argue product management could also be much more under the technology umbrella than outside. Depending on the organization and depending on the specific scope of the role. But for customer success, it could be a little bit of that gray area as well. But typically with new technical solutions, you're going to have an increased demand for someone that's there to support those end users.
Yeah, product management approaches to deployment, of new technologies are different than traditional approaches. For example, business requirements isn't really a thing when you're doing true product management. It's user stories and features and things like that. And there's another term I'm forgetting right now, but I apologize, but it's so very different. Does this signal that there are more and more organizations adopting product management methods for the work that they do?
I don't have anything to back it outside of what I've seen, and my belief is yes. Organizations are starting to shift structure, starting to shift their own internal methodologies on how they approach problems, how they solution those problems, and then deploy those solutions. So, but outside of this data, I don't have anything specific to back that, but that's my belief.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, I would say, guys, that there's two things happening. One of them is, if you look at the digitization, and we talked about it early on, of every industry, it's not just that more people are deploying, it's also that the pie is getting bigger, right? So the number of technological interfaces that require customer success people and or product management is just dramatically greater. And if we've historically put our emphasis on the bottom left, the failures are coming from the interface with customers. So I think it's a combination of more people deploying it, but also just more of the pie getting bigger. So you just, by virtue of that, you got a bigger demand too.
Cool, thank you. All right, sorry for sidetracking you, Justin.
I'll take that every time.
All right.
Again, just one last slide on the supply and demand. We don't anticipate this slowing down anytime soon. As much as we would love to see more STEM graduates and more folks stepping into or stepping out of the education realm and into these tech roles, there's a significant demand, to Brian's point, as we start to digitize a lot of areas of our life, including hardware that we never thought would have software associated with it, or specific machinery that we never thought would have connected devices that now we're getting near, if not specific real-time data on. Specifically out in California, working with some utility organizations on where to put some of these charging stations. Can someone prepay for electricity if they're coming from Portland and reserve a parking spot and then come in, plug in? How do they do it from their mobile app? And then how do you keep everything connected from a smart city perspective? There are challenges that even 10 years ago we would have never anticipated. And so the demand for the talent to be able to provide those solutions, it's only going to continue to increase. And so the ability to attract and retain talent, it's the number one question that we get. So with that, Sean, I believe it's the last slide on my end, if you want me to hand it on back over.
And that's a perfect segue, Justin, into retention. Now is the time more than ever to take a really hard look at your retention practices. Engagement. So what factors impact employee engagement? First is going to be culture. Look at your policies. Are they motivating, empowering, and respectful? Do your employees know the goals of the organization and how they factor in? Are you collaborative as an organization? Employees love to feel connected. The management team. You need a good management team that show the same skills you want your employees to emulate. The process. Life cycle of your employees. Is it smooth? Do you know what it takes to move up? Do they know what it takes to move up? And how do you look after their well-being? The health. Mental health is a huge factor right now, as well as physical health. Poor mental health was the #1 reason for British workers taking off last year. The technology. You need the right tech investments. More than 1 in 3 employees are frustrated every day with their tech. Resignations. The great resignations, as Justin stated, is here to stay, at least for now. 1 in 5 will make a change in the next year. More money is the biggest motivator to change jobs right now, but also fulfillment at work is just as important. Onboarding of less experienced talent will be a necessity. And I know, Brian, you and I talk about this all the time. Really take a hard look at the best athletes. 44% plan to ask for a raise. Skilled employees are likely to look for a promotion this year. And turnover and tenure talent is also here to stay, at least for now. Hiring, we've seen unprecedented, it's basically 2 job openings for every person who's unemployed right now. It's still an extraordinarily tight labor market. Over the past 12 months, so April 2021 to April 2022, the US has consistently hired over 400,000 employees a month. We are definitely still seeing it's a job seekers market. So the job market is strong and will remain strong. And here's some current stats that you guys can review. And next slide, Sean. So here's a really, I love this slide because it's it gives you kind of from your point of view and then from the employee point of view. So what organizations need from their people and what people need from their organizations. So organizations, what do they want? They want access to top talent, whether it's in a contingent or contract capacity. What do people want from their organizations? Mobility, internal movement, whether that's lateral or whether that's vertical. What do orgs want to, what are they focused on? Revenue and profit growth. What are people focused on? This, you know, there's the societal impact. Orgs are focused on ROI for providing rewards and benefits. What are people focused on? Compensation growth and income equity. What do, from a competitive compensation program, what are people focused on? Differentiation. What do those rewards look like? I think a popular one right now is Airbnb just rolled out work from anywhere. That's pretty incredible. You know, it is a global talent market at this point in time. This other one, annual pay for performance. What do people want? Lifelong learning. You know, that opportunity to continue to learn, grow, and evolve their careers. People, you know, people. That's a I think a pretty sticky point right now, actually. And then organization-driven development, yes. And then what are employees thinking about? Employee-centric development. So just please keep everyone top of mind. These, and I can summarize this if you guys would like, but these are trends and topics that we are hearing about daily and we'll continue to hear about. I'll turn it over to you, Sean.
So very interesting. So a personal story. My daughter's best friend came to me 2 days ago to ask me to help him figure out how to ask for a raise. And his salary is doubled in 2 years. So I talked to him, I gave him some advice, and he went to ask for a raise and they were already planning to give him a raise. So you know, compensation is just soaring.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Which also has an impact on inflation.
Sure does. Yeah.
Okay. And that's it for me, Sean.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm going to take a pause because these were sort of the trends. Now we're going to get to what are we seeing companies do to address some of these challenge and trends. Before we keep going, any other questions top of mind?
I want to point out Howard, you know, Howard Kim had a statement in relation to what you were talking about there, Lisa. He's been focusing on bringing in staff with greater potential. You know, hiring for aptitude rather than hiring for skills. Especially when you're doing something as sort of as forward-looking as, you know, taking on product management, which is different than the way we've done technology for a lot of years. You almost have to focus on aptitude and try to train up, build those skills in the team that you're building.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for recognizing it. We really do encourage this conversation daily with our clients.
And another story to share on that front, Lisa talked a little bit about internal mobility. So a client that I've been working with that has a shortage on their data engineering team. One of the initiatives that we're going through is to look across different functions, even if people don't have a true tech background. Could be people in finance or legal. but people who are interested, that have that potential, that the company's now willing to invest in that mobility, even if it's from different functions. So that, I think that's certainly a trend as well.
Yeah, and on the bottom right-hand side of the slide that Justin started with, it actually talks about Google's hiring criteria, which does not suggest you have to have a tech background. And if you look at the description when you get the slides, it actually describes a logical thinking pattern as opposed to someone that has a pure computer science sort of background. So to your guys' point, this is a trend, and what Howard mentioned is what we're seeing happen in the market everywhere.
All right.
Great. So Brian, keep going.
Yeah, so this whole thing comes down to, in our world in HR, we call the employee value proposition. And I'm a numbers guy in my business, so I'll give you guys some numbers behind some of the stuff my colleagues have talked about. So from 2020, there was some data that suggested there were 700, to give you guys some perspective, 750,000 open positions in broadly defined tech roles in the United States. So I'll throw out a question to the group. You guys can put in a number in the chat, but how many computer science grads do you think we graduate a year in the United States? And any wild guess is fine. Anybody?
I have no idea. A million?
A million, okay, yeah, good question, yeah. Less than 750. Right, the number is about 50,000. Right?
Oh, wow.
And so I always tell my clients, you need to think, at least when I run a call with a client and we're saying, look, guys, you should assume everybody in a tech function has 15 job offers waiting for them, even though we showed a 2.7% unemployment rate. Anything under 5% is considered structural employment, meaning the person's waiting to find a new job. The numbers in the first quarter of 2022 for the same open positions, 1.1 million, right? So while some of that's come down because, as Justin mentioned, because of some of the headlines, the fact of the matter is pressure points there. So this thing called the employee value proposition really is, why do employees want to work for you? And if you look at the bottom lines, it's like, okay, you need to look at what you need from a company and what the employee needs. You need to find that matching set. It needs to then align with what you're doing from a people strategy standpoint. And this third point, Lisa mentioned this, which is, it's one thing to tell people, here's what we're about and here's what you're going to get, and then you go to work there. So, as good as our talent acquisition team is, they always go, so Lisa and Justin's teams, they go out and they say to clients, okay, what's it like to work at your company? Because when they bring a candidate in and the candidate experiences something different, that's the gap in people staying, right? So that's where this credible piece has to be. It has to be true to word. And then ultimately, to get the right person and to get them to stay, it has to be meaningful to them, right? So, and it's totally okay to have somebody say, your employee value proposition doesn't work for me, right? I'm going to go somewhere else. You'd rather have that person identify that now as a candidate, as opposed to have them come on board and then figure it out once they're there. So that's the background we're talking about. We're going to cover, Sean and I, a bit more detail about this as we go. So next page talks a bit about, the general premise. And so the top line, this is what we mean by EVP. What does it mean to work here? Why should you join and why should you stay? And if you look at the execution point on the left side, right? So if you think about any premise around a brand, which is, here's what we're about. And in fact, the brand promise is usually a sentence that says, you will get this if you interact with us. And there's no difference in your employee value proposition. You create a promise. So when I told a group of people I spoke with on Tuesday, I said, hey, you need to know what your talent acquisition team is telling people about your brand. Because if people get there and it ain't the same, they're not going to stay, right? Or if they look on Glassdoor or any other of the sites where they do sort of reflection of your company, which people do now, particularly technology talent, right? And it's completely different, then they won't join you and they won't stay. So the promise is hopefully exactly what people what your people are telling people is going to happen. Then they come in, the experience should be exactly what the brand promise said it was going to be. And the way that you make that happen is through all the HR levers we've got listed here. So that's the EVP from a company standpoint. We went on and asked candidates and employees, well, what are the 5 sort of variables underneath this employee value proposition that makes a difference to you? Well, number 1, playing for a winner, right? And that has to do with all the stuff around your purpose, your mission, your vision, your values, what it's like to work for, what do you do, and what does the company do in terms of the kind of work you do? If they end up staying, I want to know that I've got a career path. And that is going to include things like upskilling and telling me how I'm going to work. And in this particular run technology roles, we used to be very focused, and this is a historical thing, but org charts and career paths were vertical. You started out at level 1 and you went up to level 5, and good luck making it to level 5. When you look at people with these skills anymore, it needs to be both horizontal, vertical, horizontal, and then even diagonal, right? You need to think about these the folks that you get in these roles and saying, boy, with the skills you've got and a little bit of training, just like Howard's talking about, I can move you over here and move you over there, right? And if if they bought into your brand promise and they're there, for my God, you got to keep them. That's this part about keeping somewhere for them to stay. The fair exchange is the comp piece. And, there are surveys out there. I'm explaining to clients right now that in a normal market, we can tell you there's supply and demand and there's an equilibrium point, and I can tell you what that market rate is for that job. In a market like this, particularly some of those hot areas that Justin and Lisa talked about, when you in those categorical areas, there's a lot more demand than there is supply. It's not a rational market. And, both these guys can tell you on a daily basis, the job that was 140 last week might be 160 this week, or at least this month, right? And so, understanding what the market is and being at least close to the market with the value proposition makes sense to employees. Once they come to work there, they want to make sure, and this is a point that we were talking about as we started the call about, I mentioned that my son goes to a Catholic Jesuit school, and they talk about kids, questioning their environment. Well, they do that, and then the school doesn't listen to them. Well, if you do that with employees and you say, your value proposition is, hey, you join here, we're going to take your ideas and we're going to improve our company, and you ask them and you don't do that, it ain't going to fly, right? So that's the control and influence that employees want to see. And the last part is the idea around all the premise around what we've seen from our all the social issues that have happened in our country in the last couple of years, including this last week with all this stuff happened down in Texas. You need to create an environment for everybody that you bring in the door to succeed. So that's what candidates are looking for when they come to work for your organization. So we're going to dive a little bit more. Sean, do you want to add something on this before we move on to the next slide?
Oh, that was fantastic. I have nothing to add on this one.
Okay. All right. So the next slide then talks a bit about, in terms of, this is the point about what do you think you're promising to the candidate? Okay. So on the left-hand side, here's the kind of stuff that I'm telling you you're going to get. And then what actually you experience is that, there's not much difference for performers. There's no job training. You've got strict hierarchy and controls. And guess what? People end up leaving because what you told them and what they got is completely different. And the numbers on the top talk about that. That 90% of our executives are saying, gosh, get people in and people are rolling out the door already, right? There are great stories, you might have seen this, but where candidates are ghosting companies, right? They take an offer and they don't even show up because they got another job offer, they go somewhere else, particularly in this sector, right? Because they heard something about your company that they didn't want to follow. So this is where understanding what you're saying and what they're getting are real. You might as well tell people what the warts are because they're going to find out, and you may as well explain it to them up front. You got a better chance of keeping people in the long term if you tell them. So Sean, anything again, please jump in as we go if there's other stuff you want to add. Okay, all right, next page then. We talked about here, and Lisa mentioned this, and I think Justin even started on it, but Lisa mentioned this around the upskilling part. If you look at, and again, particularly in tech-related roles, people really want, and sorry, I always use STEM anymore because I started with technology roles, and then of course you quickly realize that any more engineering and technology fit together. Math skills have logical thinking that can move into those other areas, and then because of the pandemic, scientific roles are under the same kind of duress, and it's true globally. So now it's just a STEM issue to me, but these issues are true across that whole talent set. So again, look at the number on the top. 94% of employees would stay if they felt that you were really investing in their career. And that has to do both on formal training, maybe paying for them to go out to UCLA and get some training, and or experiential learning that they get working on projects at your organization. And that's all where we get the soft skills, the on-demand we mentioned, and then integrated learning into the employee experience, which is a part about work experience. I want to make a special case, or call a special case about managers. Your delivery system for your employee value proposition is your manager network. And there's a 40 to 50% gap in employees staying with your company if they think your leadership team is full of hooey, right? If they don't believe the leadership team, they're going to go. But that leadership team also extends all the way down to everybody you've got in a people management role. So, when you think about the brand, to many employees, it's the person that they work for directly. So think really clearly. If you're going to spend any money on training and you've got a limited budget, spend it on improving your managers in your business. So they're involved with your. Sean, you had a point you want to make too.
Yeah, just to bring a couple of other examples in this realm. So number one, people are leaving because they don't feel like their companies have enough development programs that are tailored to their needs. Companies are marketing their training programs to candidates to attract. And a couple other examples, not listed here, but that other tech companies are investing in. Things like innovation, how to be more innovative. Feedback, feedback is huge right now. If people are feeling like they're not receiving productive feedback that's going to help them get better, they're leaving. So we're working with some companies and their managers so that they can give effective feedback, as well as employees giving feedback to their managers. So these are just a couple of kind of common examples that lots of companies are focusing on right now because employees are demanding it.
Yeah, and just to reinforce that, so when I was driving back and dropped my son off this morning, and I hope I don't get the company name wrong, because if I do, then I don't want to send you guys off on the wrong tangent. But I think it was Comcast, and they came on and said, we have won the award for the most innovative company by whatever somebody's standard, right? And they're using that, to Sean's point, as part of their radio advertising to get people to come to work there, right? So very interesting to me. I'll have to look up, but I'm pretty sure it was Comcast. The second one, and you guys mentioned it, was recently the CEO of Google eliminated the performance management protocol that they were using because there were so many complaints from employees that it didn't work. So to Sean's point, meaningful feedback and it was not being delivered. It was a lot of time and employees didn't like it. The guy went on and said, and this is back to the point about getting feedback. Employees are feeding back, it didn't work, and they actually pulled it. So really brilliant leadership, again, in that instance. Let's go to the next slide then, Sean, if you don't mind. We talked about a bit of this here, but if you look at, particularly for the younger population, what you're doing with things like ESG, and ESG meaning environment, social, and governance structures, and that can mean, that's a very broad topic, but you need to have a message pattern around what you believe about this stuff. And it comes through both from, again, the employee experience, but your leaders have to be capable. And this does start with your board and your C-suite, and then trickles through to everybody else in the organization. The next round, and Lisa and Justin can jump in here, candidates are asking these questions when they're coming on board. Tell me what your protocol is. What's your perspective on this? How do you deal with this? How do you feel about me engaging with this? They want to know what you're about. So this comes, and if you've got a purpose statement that says we're X and you do Y, there's a gap. So again, another piece around this particular topic that we need to think about, and it's true for every level, every part of certainly the United States for sure, and there's more of this happening outside the US as well. Okay, I think the last slide here, yeah, and then all this stuff wrapped together is really, and I don't know about you guys, but I graduated with an MBA in technology and finance. to think that I'm be sitting here talking to a group of technology people about HR topics and I could never have charted my career journey, right? And I had to move different companies in order to achieve that. If you look at, this is what happens with employees. If you can create an environment where you got a candidate you like, and they say they want to do this, they want to do that, work with them to find a way to make that work for them as a career journey. And at the end of the day, you're likely to be rewarded. I gave an example in the my discussion on Tuesday. I worked for the, JP Morgan Chase, and I was a comp guy running one of the functions. And I went to talk to the CHRO because I'm like, I think I want to be an investment banker. And instead of listening to the dialogue around investment banking and talking to me about it, the guy told me everything that was great about being in HR. And so I left, right? Because I'm like, well, okay, I'm never going to get to do the kind of stuff I want to do. Now, in the long run, I probably would have been better off staying there, or staying in my function, which I did. But he could have helped me think through that, because it wasn't even, at least in my career, and some of you guys might have a couple of years, similar in mine. The fact of the matter is that wasn't even considered. People were considered disloyal if you started talking about stuff like that. So the career journey of your employee matters to them deeply. Make your company a place where you can create a career journey for them that's meaningful, and you'll get a whole career out of their experience. And the last slide, I think, talks about, and those of us that are compensation, I said the audience on Tuesday was all comp people. And I said this and they all laughed out loud. They said, and to Lisa's point, when a candidate or an employee leaves, they always go and say, we're leaving because of pay. It's a politically correct thing to say, but all these other elements, which by the way, are really hard to do around your EVP, are a large part of why people leave, not just the pay element, although pay has to be at least close to the market. I think that's our canned stuff for today. And now I think Sean, you wanted to have folks ask questions and have a dialogue, I think. Is that right, Kevin and Sean?
Yep, absolutely. So I want to invite anyone, if you have a question, please unmute, come on camera, talk with us. I would like for it to sort of be an open forum. So.
Hi, Kevin, it's Teresa.
Hi, Teresa.
Hey, I don't know if I really have a question per se, but just some of the discussion about the importance of feedback. I find that a lot more challenging in this hybrid environment. So again, I don't know if that's something that we could maybe just talk about a little bit, tips and tricks on that. I think it's harder to make the personal connection with our employees that we could when everyone was, getting together in person every day. And I do find, I have to be much more intentional about scheduling time to provide that feedback, where I was very much a casual feedback provider before. So, it's all much more formal now. So it's kind of, it's great that everybody wants that real feedback, but it's very challenging in this hybrid environment. So that's my comment.
It's a great point. It's not as easy as having a meeting and stepping outside and giving somebody some quick feedback afterwards, right? Which doing it regularly so that it doesn't become an annual process, right? It just gets that muscle. People are open to it. You can have two-way feedback, so it is more difficult. So it's a great point. It is more difficult. And what some of the companies are doing that we work with is having both the consistent way of doing it, not leaving, but actually having an approach, setting expectations that people are going to get feedback. Some companies might make it, I'm not going to say this is the most effective way, but they might do it in their HR system. And it could be positive and it could be corrective. So people have to be used to that. But having an approach that people can go with and making it consistent and not just having it be an ad hoc situation where Teresa gives great feedback, but she's doing that because she's really good at it and that's part of her style, whereas everyone else is left to their own devices. So making it a consistent part of the DNA with an expectation that it is regular. It's not like a one-off annual event. And when all said and done, yeah, it is easier to do in person. So I don't think anything magical is going to change on that front.
I have a small sort of tactical idea that I think I'm going to try. And that is using the Teams call like an office drop by, like just out of the blue, video call on Teams as if they were right next door. I think I'm going to try it. We'll see how it works. It might, bug the hell out of my direct reports, but I feel like that will somewhat, I don't know, replicate the feeling that we might have had they, if they were in the office next door.
You can test it out on me, Kevin.
All right. Anyone else?
Well, I was just going to chime in, and then I know Howard raised his hand, so I want to make sure that we're getting that question. But Teresa, the difficult thing about not being able to provide that real time in the moment feedback is tough, because that's really that informal, hey, I heard this or I heard that. But Kevin, to your point, I've got a team of 13, and for better or for worse, those informal calls via Teams has helped. Once they start to get in the habit of like, hey, why in the world is he calling me on Teams? What's wrong? And once they know to expect it maybe once a week, and I try to differentiate what day, the time, especially outside of normal biweekly one-on-ones, it's had a positive impact, especially after sadly what occurred in Texas, and I'm in Austin, and what occurred just the other day, calling folks and just letting them know, checking in. Doesn't always have to be work related, but just those additional touch points that are less formal, you can typically learn quite a bit more through those and provide some good, quick, candid feedback outside of the formal one-on-ones.
Yeah.
Those are great ideas. I'll give it a try.
You said, Howard, how's it going? I didn't see you raise your hand, Howard. Go.
It's okay. Just to kind of add to what Teresa was asking about, something that I've been using for a number of years that's been helpful for me, but I know that this doesn't necessarily scale if you've got a lot of direct reports, is I also do quarterly check-ins with all of my direct reports that I specifically say is informal. So this is not something that's going through HR. HR doesn't see it. It never gets to them. But this is something that I do specifically with them to talk about specific feedback that I have for them, but then I also give them an opportunity to give me feedback. And so going back to some of the slides that were presented before about kind of building that relationship between the supervisor and the staff so that you can create that level of authenticity and create that level of comfort that the managers can talk to the employees in a way where it isn't always so formal and so hierarchy based. And so I've been finding that's far more effective. And then that way, when the annual reviews do come out, there's never that concern about surprises, because we've at least touched that 3 times prior to that annual review.
Right. No, you make some great points. One thing I guess I would add, I was going to say 2 things, but there was a podcast that just came out. Adam Grant, I believe the title of the podcast is Work Life, but he was interviewing Satya from Microsoft, and that specific comment about, because Howard, I'll make the assumption that your team and your directs feel very comfortable providing feedback to you because you've created a safe environment in which they know there's not going to be some negative, harsh reaction. They can be honest and transparent, right? That can be really difficult to do, because even if you've got a good personal relationship, if you don't have that safe environment where they can provide accurate feedback, it can be really tough to pull that from them, then making the feedback chain as a whole a tough one, especially from an informal perspective. And so Satya talked about being open and transparent about areas that he may be weak in, and being open and candid about that. And if Microsoft's CEO is very adamant about that with his directs, I think it's a pretty good process to follow. And so it was good advice, but great podcast episode. Not to plug Adam Grant, but he does some great work. So just wanted to throw that out there as well.
And just add on, and I think this is, it's a great topic, right? Back to the employee experience, providing feedback. And usually, let's not forget about positive feedback. One of the stats is for constructive feedback, let's just call it, to really stick, right? The best way to do that is to, over time, I think the ratio is 5 or 6 to 1 positive pieces of feedback because then your teams aren't, they're under, you know, if you're giving positive, when that constructive feedback does come, right, it's real and they appreciate it and it's not coming out of the blue. So I think that's one other critical component that often, even in this virtual world, can kind of like fade away, is just positive reinforcement, positive feedback. That in itself is great. But then when the constructive feedback does come, it's feeling authentic and the teams understand that this is for their benefit.
Yeah, I think I saw a video once where Phil Jackson, you Laker fans out there, said, yeah, 6-1. If you've got some, you know, feedback to give, start with 6 positives before you launch into the feedback, because right, they'll connect to it a lot better. Hopefully, you've got 6 positives to give before the negative feedback. Yeah. All right. I'd like to go back a little bit, Brian. You had a slide about on-demand self-paced learning. I've actually sort of had mixed results with on-demand self-paced learning. I really ramped it up, you know, highly when the pandemic started. But after a year of really focusing on on-demand self-paced digital learning, I found that half of my staff didn't really connect with it. Like they needed a classroom to really be able to learn effectively. I'm not sure that if that's what the stats told, but what are your thoughts around that, and any of the other our other experts? What are your thoughts around how to make on-demand self-paced learning more effective?
Yeah, Sean, jump in. I mean, I think, you know, and we have a whole team that focuses on learning and development. I do think that adult learning models, generally, there's 3 or 4 different mediums actually work better than just one. And I think when you just have one flat environment, which is, you know, the online, it's not going to work for everybody, right? So there are people that it will, to your point. I think there's people, Kevin, that it'll work for. There's others that it won't. And then the other thing is, once they get through training, generally, if you don't use the training within like a couple of days, right? So you get back on, you've done the course on Friday, and you don't look at it again until 2 months out because the company doesn't have anything for you to do that's related to it. It's a waste of money, right? So, there are some things around, and Sean, you can jump in, correct me on this, but again, I think multiple platforms, when we can get back in person, or other approaches are generally more positive with adult learning.
Yeah, and I'll add, whether it's self-paced e-learning or classroom learning, that's just the start. I can think of plenty of amazing courses I've gone to in person where I was there like, wow, this is amazing. And I went back to my normal life and there was no reinforcement and nothing else was coming up, and it just became out of sight, out of mind. So I think the key is what's done with that learning afterwards. So, you know, what are our clients doing and how are we helping them? You know, having ways of building it into their daily processes, having cohort-based projects, right? Where it's, you go through, and even if it's an e-learning, it doesn't matter. There's ways of keeping people connected and having the reinforcement, and it's the what they do after that there's actually going to be behavioral change. Yeah. Because if it's just doing e-learning, it's not going to hurt, right? But it's not also going to necessarily change anything. But the same could be said for classroom. It's usually what happens afterwards, whether it's accountability, practice, and just making it part of the daily routine.
Yeah. I think that's where the purpose of the training, right? So let's say you got a person on the team that is interested in moving from one level of a software engineer to another, or moving, as I talked about, vertical and horizontal, maybe horizontally moving into data science from a software engineering background. If you offer, here are the credential sets that we need you to take on in order to do that, they got motivation, right? There's a purpose in what they're doing, and it's motivation as opposed to just having a, training to have training, right? And I think that, so if there's purpose to it and they see it, I think they're more likely to follow through and for it to be meaningful.
Yeah. All right, anyone else out there have any other questions? I have one more, but I want to make sure that I'm keeping the floor open to everyone. Trying to look for virtual hands up. I'm not seeing anything yet. All right, well, let me launch into my other question. I think that Brian, you had a slide, you talked about diversity and inclusion. And something that I think is extremely important if you know, to really aid with recruiting efforts. But I had something really interesting happen to me earlier this week. I was speaking with a deputy city manager from another city, a top 10 in city population-wise city, and he was telling me how his city has a great record with regard to traditional diversity measures like race and gender, sexual orientation, you know, in their recruiting and retention. But he said that they tend to hire people that all think alike, and it causes them to get stuck in certain ways when everybody's thinking exactly the same. Right? They may not see the cliff coming their way. How important do you believe diversity of thought is in an organization to go along with, you know, some of those other measures?
I think it depends on what you're doing. If you're at McDonald's and you know you're trying to run hamburgers through the thing, I don't want a lot of diverse thought, right? I want people operationally executing. If the group I've got has to be innovative and business changes, because I mean, then I want them to be innovative. And you're right, you should test for that. But I do think that that's an underlooked element. I mean, it's an unconscious bias as well, right? You know, and so I agree with you. I think that this topic is huge, right? I mean, we've scratched the surface of it and we've used, you know, sort of visible differences as things that we're using because we need to address those issues. But the subtle text around diversity of thought and things like that, I give you an example, Kevin. A couple of years ago, when I had a group of people that I work with, and there was like National Women's Day, right? And then they had a group that would form after it, and they were always talking about issues with mothers taking care of their kids, right? And I'm like, well, I have to deal with childcare with my son, right? And I actually went to one of the meetings, and well, I was running the group, so they let me sit in there, but they were all making fun of, why are you here? And I'm like, because the stuff you're talking about is relevant to me, right? You know, I mean, like and it was really interesting to me how a group of women who have felt disaffected, someone came in with the topic that I was interested in, they didn't want me there, right? They wanted me to leave. So I think this issue around unconscious bias is everywhere, and it's a problem that we're just starting to scratch the surface of, but we got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and I'll add, and it's proven. You know, you can think of diversity through many lenses, but of thought, of style, teams that have the right diversity from every dimension, including thought and style, will perform better and will be more. If you have everyone who's like a hard driver, there's going to be a lot of fighting going on, right? But if you got a team, let's say that's got someone who's the driver who's going to make it get done, the relationship person, the analytical type person, right? And then whatever other dimensions you want to think of. When you've got a team that can gel, that's thinking through those dimensions, every project we do, right? Every aspect, right? If you're not thinking through all those dimensions, it's not going to be effective. So it is absolutely a key to also factor in that diversity of thought and style with all the other critical diversity dimensions.
Cool. All right. Well, we've run just a little bit long. I think we're out of time. I want to thank our panel for the awesome discussion today. I found it to be really intriguing. So thank you guys. Rafi?
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, everyone. Just to we have the upcoming events slide up. June 1st, next Wednesday, is our Young Tech Professionals Spring Quarter Tech Bootcamp Demo Day. If you're looking for talent, this is the best place to look for UCLA talent. If you like to This is open to all members. So if you're looking for great UCLA talent, come hear their pitches. And then July 14th, we have an in-person event on campus at the Poly Pavilion Club. And then September 29th is our annual Executive Leadership Awards dinner, which is going to be hybrid with metaverse theme. And we're still working on that, but that's in the planning stages. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon.
You too. Thank you for having us.